What if everything we celebrated about Kendrick Lamar's GNX album was built on top of a dead man's grave? Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Literally. What if the most decorated rapper alive took the flows, the vocabulary, the mannerisms, and even the signature humor of a murdered Los Angeles legend and repackaged them as his own revolutionary sound without ever once whispering that man's name? And what if it goes even deeper than that? What if buried inside the biggest album of the year, there are not just borrowed styles, but actual, calculated disses aimed at a rapper who can no longer defend himself because he was stabbed to death 5 years ago? Because that is exactly what a growing number of people are now arguing about Kendrick Lamar and the late, great Drakeo the Ruler. And when you see the evidence they have assembled, when you actually sit with the lyrics and the visuals and the history, you might never hear GNX the same way again. But I want to warn you right now, what we are about to break down is not for the casual listener. This is for the people who actually pay attention to the words, the people who understand that in hip-hop nothing is ever an accident, and the people who know that the most dangerous disses are the ones that are never spoken aloud. But before we plunge into all of that, I want to welcome every single one of you back. I hope you are all doing well, doing amazing, living your best lives, because the conversation we are about to have is not for the faint of heart. This is one of those topics that has been simmering underneath the surface for months, and it has finally boiled over into something that nobody can ignore anymore. And look, I know some of you are going to feel a certain type of way about what gets laid out here today. That is completely fine. That is actually the point. If you are new here, do yourself a favor and subscribe, because this is the kind of content that makes you the smartest person in every comment section you ever step into. And if you have been rocking with us for a while, you already know what time it is, so drop a like and let us get into it. So here is the situation. When Kendrick Lamar dropped GNX out of nowhere, the entire world stopped. People were calling it a masterpiece. People were calling it a return to form. People were saying Kendrick Lamar had once again reinvented himself and reminded everybody why he sits on the throne of hip-hop with zero competition in sight. The features were all LA artists. The production was heavily anchored by DJ Mustard. The energy felt like a love letter to the West Coast. But somewhere in between all the celebration and the streaming records and the pop-out concert and the Grammy nominations, a very specific conversation started taking shape in the corners of the internet. And it was a conversation that nobody in the mainstream wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. The question was simple but explosive. Was Kendrick Lamar paying homage to Drakeo the Ruler on GNX, or was he doing something far more sinister? Was he mocking him? Was he stealing from him? Was he, in fact, dissing a dead man? Now, for those of you who might not be deeply embedded in Los Angeles rap culture, let me paint the picture of who Drakeo the Ruler actually was, because understanding his significance is the only way to understand why this theory carries so much weight. Drakeo the Ruler was not just another rapper. He was the future of LA rap, full stop. He had a sound that was completely his own. He had a vocabulary that was completely his own. He had a sense of humor in his music that was completely his own. He rapped about impalas and pizza parties and mingling and blicking and all of these terms that became part of the cultural lexicon of an entire generation of LA kids. Drakeo the Ruler was so influential that if you walked through any neighborhood in South Central in 2019 or 2020, you would hear his music pouring out of cars more than you would hear anybody else, including Kendrick Lamar. That is not an exaggeration. Drakeo the Ruler was the most played, most talked about, most impactful rapper in Los Angeles during that stretch, and it was not even close. He was the guy. He was the one everyone was trying to sound like. He was the one everyone was trying to mimic. And it is important to understand that Drakeo the Ruler built all of this from nothing. He spent time locked up, he beat a murder case, he came home, and immediately went right back to dominating the streets with his music. He created an entire movement called the Stink Team. He developed a rap language so distinctive that linguistic professors could probably write papers about it, and he did all of it without a major label cosign, without a radio hit, without any of the machinery that most artists need to reach that level of cultural penetration. Drakeo the Ruler was pure grassroots, pure street, pure talent. And then, in December of 2021, He was murdered. He was stabbed backstage at a festival before a YG concert, and the loss sent shockwaves through the entire city. 5 years later, nobody has come even close to filling the void that Drakeo the Ruler left behind. Not one person. The LA rap scene has been searching for its next voice ever since, and the reason they cannot find one is because the one they had was irreplaceable. So that is the backdrop. That is the weight of the man we are talking about. And now here comes Kendrick Lamar, an artist who has built an entire brand around Black unity, around gang unity, around shaking hands across color lines, around uplifting the culture. And he drops an album that sounds, in several very specific moments, like it could have been recorded by Drakeo the Ruler. And not only does he never say Drakeo's name, not only does he never publicly acknowledge where those flows came from, but there are people who believe that certain lyrics on the album are actually aimed directly at Drakeo the Ruler as disses. So let us lay out the 3 main allegations, and you can decide for yourself what is really going on here. And I want to be clear about something up front. I am not here to tell you what to think. I am not here to cancel anybody. I am here to lay out the evidence, give you the context, and let you make your own judgment. Because that is what real hip-hop discourse looks like. Not tweeting emotional reactions, not jumping on TikTok to scream your takes into the void, but actually sitting with the material and thinking critically about what is in front of you. The first thing people point to is the Squabble Up video. Now, Squabble Up was one of the most talked about visuals off G-Nex. When it dropped, the initial reaction from most people was that Kendrick Lamar was paying respect to the LA culture. There is a scene where Kendrick is kneeling over what appears to be a memorial, and the first read on that was, oh, he is honoring the fallen. He is giving flowers to the people we lost. That is beautiful. That is powerful. That is exactly the kind of thing we expect from Kendrick Lamar. But as weeks passed and people started dissecting every frame of that video, the tone of the conversation shifted dramatically. People started noticing things that did not add up. They started noticing Kendrick Lamar doing something with his eyes, this nonchalant, almost bored eye roll toward the camera, this deliberate refusal to hold eye contact. And if you know anything about Drakeo the Ruler's music videos, you know that was his signature move. Drakeo the Ruler did that in nearly every visual he ever shot. He would look at the camera and then roll his eyes away, this dismissive, unbothered energy that became as much a part of his brand as his vocabulary. It was not just a stylistic choice, it was a statement. It said, I am so confident, I am so above this, that I cannot even be bothered to look at you for more than a second. That was Drakeo the Ruler's entire persona distilled into a single gesture. And Kendrick Lamar does not do that in his other videos. Go check. Go watch the Humble video. Go watch the DNA video. Go watch King Kunta. Go watch anything from before G-Nex. You will not find Kendrick Lamar doing that eye roll thing. But in Squabble Up, there it is, clear as day, and he is doing it while kneeling over a memorial. And then the lyrics hit even harder. While Kendrick Lamar is crouched over this memorial, he starts rapping about wolf tickets and silencing them, about whole other politics, about somebody being a bee with some things in them, a whole lot of this and that. On the surface, most people read those bars as shots at Drake, because this was right after the beef and Kendrick Lamar had just dismantled Drake in spectacular fashion. So the wolf tickets line, that reads as Kendrick Lamar saying Drake was selling noise, and I shut him up. That makes sense. That interpretation is clean and obvious. But other people have looked at those same lyrics through a completely different lens. They say, wait, whole other politics. We know that Drakeo the Ruler's murder involved street politics. We know there were layers of complication around what happened to him. We know there were allegations and tensions and a web of relationships that made the whole situation murky in a way that went far beyond simple rap beef. So when Kendrick Lamar says these are some whole other politics while he is over a memorial, people who are already suspicious hear something completely different. They hear a dog whistle. They hear a coded reference to the very street dynamics that surrounded Drakeo the Ruler's death. And then it gets even more specific. Kendrick Lamar raps about smoking Black and Milds and drinking Smirnoff. Now, if you are not from the culture, let me explain what that means. Black and Milds are cheap cigars. Smirnoff is cheap alcohol. These are not luxury items. These are the bottom shelf, dustiest, most budget options available. In the world of LA street culture, what you smoke and what you drink is a status marker. If you are smoking backwoods and drinking Hennessy, you are doing all right. If you are smoking Black and Milds and drinking Smirnoff, you are at the bottom. That is just how the culture reads those signals. And here is where it gets fascinating. People dug up old freestyles from Drakeo the Ruler and his brother Ralphie the Plug where they are specifically rapping about their enemies, their ops, smoking Black and Milds and drinking Smirnoff. The implication in Drakeo's freestyle was that his enemies were broke, dusty, and living at the bottom of the barrel. That was the insult. Your ops are so broke they are smoking Black and Milds and drinking Smirnoff. It was a way of saying, we are up here and you are down there, and the distance between us is measured in the quality of what we consume. And now here comes Kendrick Lamar on GNX, rapping about smoking Black and Milds and drinking Smirnoff over a memorial, and then immediately following those bars with, we outside, we about to kill him off. Now, I am not making any accusations. I am not telling you what to believe. I am telling you what people are theorizing, and the theory is that Kendrick Lamar is positioning himself as the ops. He is adopting the language that Drakeo the Ruler used to describe his enemies, and he is doing it while kneeling over what people believe could be a memorial connected to Drakeo. Whether that memorial is actually about Drakeo the Ruler, we cannot confirm. We cannot deny it either. But the combination of the eye-roll mannerisms, the Black and Milds and Smirnoff bars, and the kill him off line right after has created a powder keg of speculation that is not going away. And here is the thing that makes this even harder to dismiss. We all know how intentional Kendrick Lamar is with his visuals. This is a man who hides Easter eggs in every frame, who builds layers of meaning into every costume choice, every prop, every camera angle. Nothing in a Kendrick Lamar video is there by accident. So when you see him doing Drakeo the Ruler's signature eye roll over a memorial while rapping bars that echo Drakeo's own vocabulary about his enemies, you have to at least ask the question. You have to at least entertain the possibility that this was not just an innocent tribute. Now, if that was the only allegation, you could maybe write it off as a stretch. You could say, look, the memorial could be about anybody, and smoking cheap cigars and drinking cheap liquor is not something Drakeo the Ruler invented. And you would have a point. But there is more. There is significantly more. And this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for a lot of Kendrick Lamar fans, because the second allegation is the one that has the most mainstream traction, the one that even Drakeo the Ruler's own family has spoken about publicly. The stolen flows. Here is the thing. If you are from LA, if you listen to LA rap, the very first time you heard Not Like Us, before GNX even came out, the very first time that beat dropped and Kendrick Lamar started rapping, something in your brain fired. Something told you, I have heard this before. Not the words. The cadence. The rhythm. The way the syllables were landing. Specifically, that opening stretch where Kendrick Lamar says sometimes you got to pop out and show, that right there, that is Drakeo the Ruler's cadence. That is the way Drakeo the Ruler wrote beats. That syncopation, that specific rhythmic pocket, that laid-back but aggressive delivery, that is pure Drakeo. And I know what some of you are already preparing to type in the comments. You are going to say, Drakeo the Ruler did not invent that flow. He got it from the Bay Area, from Oakland, from the Northern California rap scene. And you know what? You are not wrong. Nothing is new under the sun. Everything traces back to something. But here is the reality. Drakeo the Ruler took that style. He made it his own. He popularized it in a way that nobody before him ever did, and he became the single most influential LA rapper of the past decade because of it. So when Kendrick Lamar, the biggest rapper in the world, deploys that exact cadence on the biggest diss song of the century, people are going to notice. And they did. And there is a specific interview that people bring up in this conversation that I think is incredibly telling. Back in 2019, Schoolboy Q, one of Kendrick Lamar's closest allies in TD, was asked a simple question. Who are some up-and-coming LA rappers that you are listening to? Who should people be keeping an eye on? And Schoolboy Q started naming people. He named Blueface. He named Savvy. He named One Take Jake. He named AzChike. He named Rucci. He listed a whole slate of artists. But there was one name that was conspicuously absent from that list. Drakeo the Ruler. Now, 2019 and 2020, this is the absolute peak of Drakeo the Ruler's popularity. This is when he was the most played rapper in LA. This is when his influence was at its absolute maximum. Asking an LA rapper who they are listening to in 2019 and not mentioning Drakeo the Ruler is like asking someone who the best basketball player of the 2010s is and them naming everybody except LeBron James. You are naming Jason Tatum, you are naming Giannis, you are naming all these incredible players, but the most dominant one is not on your list. At that point, the omission becomes louder than any inclusion. It becomes a statement in itself. And people have read that omission as evidence of a deeper tension, a political divide within the LA rap community where Kendrick Lamar's camp and Drakeo, the Ruler's camp, existed in separate orbits that never quite aligned. And it did not stop at Not Like Us. When GNX dropped, the Drakeo the Ruler influence was scattered all over the project. Songs like Hey Now and Peekaboo are direct callbacks to the hushed, murmuring, almost conversational delivery that Drakeo the Ruler pioneered. And there is a moment on the album where Kendrick Lamar says Big Face Buddha, which is a near-exact lift from Drakeo the Ruler's own song, Mr. Bank Buddha. That is not a coincidence. That is not an accident. That is a direct reference to a specific Drakeo the Ruler track, and Kendrick Lamar never once said where it came from. And here is where it gets really real. Drakeo the Ruler's own father went on No Jumper with Adam 22 and talked about this publicly. He said that he heard a song on GNX and for a moment he genuinely thought he was listening to a Drakeo the Ruler track he had never heard before. He said the rhyme pattern, the syncopation, the flow, everything was the same. He said he understood why Kendrick Lamar might not want to publicly shout out Drakeo given the politics and the image Kendrick was trying to maintain with his positive movement, but he also said at some point you have to keep it real. At some point you have to acknowledge where the sound came from. And when a dead rapper's father has to go on a podcast to ask for basic credit, something is fundamentally broken in how we honor our fallen artists. And there is something else that adds a chilling layer to this entire conversation. Before Drakeo the Ruler died, he predicted exactly what would happen. There is a clip that has been circulating online where Drakeo the Ruler, speaking with the casual confidence that was his trademark, laid out a prophecy about the future of LA rap. He said that one day there would be a mysterious tape, an album that comes out with a bunch of popping LA rappers on it, and it would be produced by a specific producer, and every LA rapper would be on it except the most popular one. Except him. He said the producer would be Mustard. And he said this before GNX existed, before anybody knew Kendrick Lamar was working on a Mustard-produced album packed with LA features. Think about that for a second. Drakeo the Ruler literally called the play before it was run. He described an album full of LA artists, produced by DJ Mustard, with himself as the conspicuous absence, and then years later that exact album materialized. Now, was that a prediction, or was Drakeo the Ruler simply reading the politics of the LA rap scene with the kind of clarity that comes from being deeply embedded in it? Probably the latter. Drakeo the Ruler understood the dynamics at play. He understood who had power, who had alliances, who had beef, and who would be excluded when the machinery of the industry decided to do something big. He knew that if someone with Kendrick Lamar's platform and Mustard's production decided to assemble an LA album, he would be the one left out, not because he was not talented enough, but because his politics and his persona did not fit the narrative that was being constructed. And the fact that he was right makes everything about GNX feel just a little bit more uncomfortable. And the criticism did not just come from Drakeo's family. Publications started weighing in. There was a review from Passion of the Weiss that described Kendrick Lamar's GNX era as a heavy appropriation of Drakeo the Ruler's blasé swagger, his nonchalant eye rolls, his slang, even the way he enunciates syllables. The reviewer called it regressive and potentially cynical, accusing Kendrick Lamar of directly copying the styles of younger artists and obscuring the actual originators of the sound. And that is the word that keeps coming up in this conversation. Obscuring. Not borrowing. Not paying tribute. Obscuring. As if the intent was not to honor Drakeo the Ruler, but to absorb him so completely that the audience never asks where the style came from. Now, do I think that is what Kendrick Lamar was doing? I do not know. I genuinely do not know. But I will say this. The flow borrowing is undeniable. You can argue about intent all day long, but you cannot argue about the reality that Kendrick Lamar took cadences and vocabulary that were unmistakably Drakeo the Ruler's and used them on the biggest platform in music without attribution. Whether that is theft or tribute is a conversation for the comments, but the fact that it happened is not up for debate. And that brings us to the third allegation, and this is the one that I personally find the most compelling, the most difficult to dismiss, and the most uncomfortable to sit with. The Peekaboo situation. If you have heard GNX, you know Peekaboo. It is one of the standout tracks, featuring AzChike, and it has this energy that immediately feels different from the rest of the album. It has this playful but menacing quality, this almost taunting humor, and the title itself, Peekaboo, is not something you hear rappers building entire songs around. It is not typical hip-hop subject matter. But here is the thing. Peekaboo is exactly Drakeo the Ruler's brand of humor. If you go back and listen to Drakeo the Ruler's catalog, you will find a song called Boogeyman. And on that song, Drakeo the Ruler is dissing one of his ops, and at a key moment he hits them with a peekaboo, as in, we caught you slipping, we popped up on you, you did not see this coming, peekaboo, like you were playing a game with a baby. That is classic Drakeo the Ruler wordplay. Clever, unexpected, slightly mocking, and unforgettable. It was the kind of bar that made you rewind the song, the kind of line that became a catchphrase among his fans. And here is where the layers start stacking up in a way that makes this allegation the hardest one to wave away. On Drakeo the Ruler's Boogeyman song, the person he was dissing with the peekaboo line was AzChike. Yes, AzChike. The same AzChike who is featured on Peekaboo on GNX. The same AzChike who had a long-standing, well-documented beef with Drakeo the Ruler. The same AzChike who was one of Drakeo's primary targets in his music. And Kendrick Lamar chose to put this man on a song called Peekaboo. Now, let that sink in for a second. Really sit with it. You have a song title that directly references a Drakeo the Ruler song where Drakeo was dissing AzChike, and then you put AzChike on that song. The implications there are staggering. It is like naming a song after someone's gravestone and then putting their enemy on the track. The audacity of it, whether intentional or not, is breathtaking. And it gets deeper. When you listen to the lyrics on Peekaboo, there are bars that feel like they are aimed directly at Drakeo the Ruler. The song opens with talk about somebody running their mouth on IG Live, which is exactly what Drakeo the Ruler was infamous for. Before a lot of people even got into Drakeo's music, they knew him as the guy who was always on Instagram Live talking, playing beats, going at people, holding court in front of his phone camera for hours at a time. IG Live was Drakeo's sandbox. It was where he built his legend, where he aired his grievances, where he connected directly with his fans without any filter. So when a song opens with a bar about talking tough on IG Live, and that song features AzChike, who had beef with Drakeo, and the song is called Peekaboo, which is a reference to a Drakeo diss aimed at AzChike, the theory starts looking less like a conspiracy and more like a coordinated musical response. And then AzChike has bars on the song that sound like they are referencing Drakeo's death, talking about hearing what happened to your man and not being sorry for your loss. When you put that in the context of a song titled Peekaboo, which is a callback to a Drakeo the Ruler diss aimed at AzChike, the whole thing starts to feel like a revenge track. Like AzChike finally got his shot to respond to Drakeo, except Drakeo is no longer alive to respond back. And that is what makes this so deeply uncomfortable. In regular rap beef, both sides get to trade shots. The back and forth is the whole point. But when one side is dead, it stops being a battle and starts being something else entirely. It starts being an execution. And the question of whether Kendrick Lamar knew what he was participating in when he jumped on that song is the question that hangs over this entire theory like a shadow. And here is my own observation that I think is worth throwing into the mix. When I first heard Peekaboo, before I knew any of this background, my immediate reaction was that this sounds like an AzChike song that Kendrick Lamar was added to, not the other way around. It does not feel like a Kendrick Lamar song featuring AzChike. It feels like an AzChike song that Kendrick Lamar jumped on. The cadence, the humor, the structure, the way the verses are organized, all of it feels more aligned with AzChike's style than Kendrick Lamar's. And if that is the case, then there is a very real possibility that AzChike had this song, or at least the bones of it, already structured as a response to Drakeo the Ruler. Maybe before Drakeo died. Maybe after. We do not know the timeline. But what we do know is that AzChike and Drakeo the Ruler had genuine, heated beef. We know that AzChike had written rebuttals. We know that in the world of rap battles, people keep dices in the cut, ready to deploy. And then an opportunity comes to collaborate with the biggest rapper in the world on a major album, and AzChike sends over what he thinks is some hard material, and that material happens to contain bars aimed at a dead man he had beef with. And Kendrick Lamar, whether knowingly or unknowingly, puts his name on it and delivers it to the world. It is also worth noting that AzChike himself has spoken about the collaboration, describing how the feature changed his life overnight, how he signed a deal with Warner Records just weeks after GNX dropped. He described himself as fiercely loyal, saying once he is riding with you, he is riding with you. But loyalty to Kendrick Lamar and the question of whether certain bars on Peekaboo were aimed at Drakeo the Ruler are two separate conversations. You can be loyal to your collaborator and still have brought pre-existing material into the session. So the question becomes, did Kendrick Lamar know? Did he go into that studio session understanding that these were Drakeo the Ruler dices? Did he hear the IG Live bars and the not sorry for your lost lines and think, yeah, this works? Or did he just hear a hot verse, hear a catchy concept, and jump on it without fully understanding the subtext? Because if he did know, if he understood that these were shots at a murdered rapper, and he chose to rap them anyway while also doing the Squabble Up memorial scene and borrowing the flows, then we have to ask the hardest question of all. Why? Why would Kendrick Lamar, the same man who headlined the pop-out concert and preached unity, the same man who raps about loving yourself and shaking hands across gang lines, the same man who built an entire narrative around bringing LA together, why would that person take shots at Drakeo the Ruler after he is dead? And there are a few theories about that. Some people point to the Drake connection. Remember, Drakeo the Ruler was close with Drake. Drakeo shouted Drake out on multiple songs. They had a relationship. Drake showed Drakeo respect publicly while Drakeo was alive, which is more than Kendrick Lamar has done. And we all know that Kendrick Lamar had the most high-profile rap beef of the modern era with Drake. So the theory goes that maybe Kendrick Lamar saw Drakeo the Ruler's connection to Drake as a mark against him, and when the opportunity presented itself to take shots, even subliminal ones, he took it. It would be an extension of the Drake beef by proxy. If you are cool with my enemy, you are my enemy too. That is how tribalism works, and hip-hop is nothing if not tribal. Other people think it is about LA politics, about the complicated web of allegiances and rivalries that exist beneath the surface of the music industry out there, things that people from the outside will never fully understand. There were people in Kendrick Lamar's orbit who had issues with Drakeo the Ruler. There were producers like DJ Mustard who were not on good terms with Drakeo. There were entire factions within the LA scene that existed in tension with Drakeo's Stink Team movement. And when you assemble an album that brings all of those people together and leaves Drakeo out, you are making a political statement whether you intend to or not. The absence speaks louder than any feature credit ever could. And then there are people who think Kendrick Lamar just got caught up in the creative process, liked the sound, liked the energy, and did not think deeply enough about the implications of what he was putting into the world. He heard something that moved him, he used it, and the political and historical weight of that borrowing never fully registered. That is the most generous interpretation, and it is the one I find myself leaning toward, but I acknowledge that it is just one reading of a very complicated situation. But here is where I have to be honest with you. And maybe I am brainwashed by Kendrick Lamar. Maybe I have been so conditioned by his messaging and his artistry that I am giving him a pass that he does not deserve. But when I look at the totality of his work, when I look at the consistent themes of unity and empowerment and Black excellence that run through everything he has ever done, the idea of him sneak dissing a dead man just does not align. It would run contrary to everything he has built his legacy on. The GNX features were supposed to be about putting on for LA. The pop-out was supposed to be about bringing people together. The whole era was framed as a celebration of West Coast culture. And dissing Drakeo the Ruler in the middle of all of that would be like hosting a peace summit and secretly handing someone a knife under the table. It does not fit. It does not compute. But I also cannot sit here and pretend the evidence does not exist. The Peekaboo situation is real. There is something there. The connection to Drakeo's Boogeyman song is real. The AzChike beef is real. The flows are borrowed. That is real. The Squabble Up mannerisms and lyrics are there. Whether you interpret them as homage or mockery, they are there. So where does that leave us? I think the most honest answer is that the flow borrowing is obvious and undeniable. Kendrick Lamar took cadences and vocabulary from Drakeo the Ruler and used them on GNX, and he should have been more vocal about where they came from. I think outright paying homage would have been the right move, and the fact that he did not do that is a legitimate criticism that people are allowed to raise without being called haters. I think the Peekaboo theory is the strongest of the three allegations, and there is a very real chance that AzChike brought pre-written Drakeo the Ruler disses into that collaboration, and that some of those bars made it onto the final product. Whether Kendrick Lamar knew the full context is something only he and AzChike know for certain. And I think the Squabble Up memorial theory is the murkiest of the three. You cannot prove the memorial is about Drakeo. You can try to connect the Black and Milds and Smirnoff bars to the Ralphie the Plug freestyles, but at that point you are reaching pretty far, and reaching undermines the stronger parts of the argument. And I want to say something about the bigger picture here, because this is not just about Kendrick Lamar and Drakeo the Ruler. This is about how hip-hop treats its dead. This is about who gets flowers and who gets forgotten. Drakeo the Ruler was arguably the most important rapper in Los Angeles over the past decade. His influence is so deep that you can hear it in rappers who will never even admit they listen to him. People take his beats and put his a cappella vocals over them, and they sound natural, like they were always meant to be there. That is how perfectly his style fit the production that came after him. And yet, at the pop-out concert, when LA Unity was on full display, Drakeo the Ruler's name was barely whispered. On GNX, when Kendrick Lamar was supposedly putting on for the city, the person whose sound he was borrowing was never acknowledged. Drakeo the Ruler's own father had to go on a podcast and beg for basic recognition. That is not just a Kendrick Lamar problem. That is a culture problem. That is a problem with how quickly we move on, how easily we absorb the innovations of the dead and forget to say their names. Drake, for all the things people criticize him for, gave Drakeo the Ruler his flowers while he was still alive. He showed him respect publicly. He acknowledged the talent. And yet here we are, with the biggest rapper in the world channeling Drakeo the Ruler's entire aesthetic on the biggest album of the year, and the closest thing we get to a mention is a song called Peekaboo that might actually be a diss. If that is not a twisted irony, I do not know what is. And I think this is the part of the conversation that extends beyond Kendrick Lamar and Drakeo the Ruler and touches something deeper about the industry, about who gets credited, about who gets erased, about how power dynamics in music determine whose contributions are celebrated and whose are quietly absorbed without attribution. So let me put my cards on the table. Do I think Kendrick Lamar woke up one morning and decided to diss a dead man? No, I do not. I think the truth is probably more complicated and more human than that. I think Kendrick Lamar heard a sound that resonated with him, a sound that was undeniably effective and undeniably LA, and he used it. I think he probably rationalized it as paying tribute through action rather than words. And I think when it came to Peekaboo, he may have walked into a situation where the subtext was already baked in and either did not fully grasp it or chose not to ask too many questions. But I also think that is not good enough. I think when you are Kendrick Lamar, when you have the platform and the influence and the cultural capital that you have a responsibility to be more careful. You have a responsibility to say the name. You have a responsibility to make sure that when you borrow from the dead, you are not also burying them deeper. And I want to hear from you on this. I want to know where you land. Do you think Kendrick Lamar was dissing Drakeo the Ruler on GNX? Do you think the Peekaboo connection is a deliberate shot or an unfortunate coincidence? Do you think the flow borrowing is theft or tribute? Do you think Drakeo the Ruler's family deserves a public acknowledgement from the biggest rapper in the world? And do you think the Squabble Up memorial is about Drakeo, or is that people reaching? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is a conversation that needs to happen out in the open, not buried in Reddit threads and TikTok comments. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and check out the suggested videos on your screen right now, because there is plenty more where this came from. Stay sharp, stay curious, and keep your ears open. Because in hip-hop, the truth is always hiding in the bars. You just have to know how to listen.